An American nurse, brave, calm, and compassionate. Amid fire and blood, she chose to heal, not to hate. Her courage crossed enemy lines and changed a man's life. Subscribe now and discover the untold stories of humanity in war.
June 17, 1944, somewhere in North Africa, Obergefreiter Klaus Bergmann lies on a makeshift cot in an American field hospital, and he knows he is going to lose his leg. The smell hits him first. That sickly sweet rot of infected flesh that he has learned means gangrene. His own flesh. The wound in his left thigh caught by shrapnel 3 days ago during the American advance has turned dark. Purple-black tendrils creep up toward his hip like poison vines. He can feel the fever burning behind his eyes. But it is not the gangrene that terrifies him most. Klaus is 23 years old. He has been told since basic training what happens to German soldiers in American hands. The propaganda films showed it clearly. Americans are barbaric. They torture prisoners. They experiment on the wounded. His company commander had warned them all, if you are captured, expect no mercy from these cowboys and gangsters. Now, lying in this tent with canvas walls that barely block the North African sun, Klaus can hear American voices outside. Casual laughter, someone whistling, the clatter of medical equipment. He closes his eyes and thinks of his sister Maria back in Stuttgart. He wonders if she will ever know what happened to him. The tent flap opens. Klaus's heart hammers. This is it. He expects the saw, the blade, the amputation without anesthesia that the propaganda promised. He has seen what gangrene does. He knows the American doctors will have to cut. The only question is whether they will let him die from the shock or whether they have something worse planned. Through his fevered haze, Klaus watches an American captain approach. The officer wears a medical insignia. He is younger than Klaus expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes that have clearly seen too many wounded men. The captain pulls up a metal stool. He looks at Klaus's leg, then he looks at Klaus's face, and he smiles. Rough break, soldier, the American says in broken German, but we are going to try something new. Klaus does not understand. Try something new? What does that mean? Some new torture technique? But what happened next would change everything he thought about Americans. Klaus had been captured during the chaotic American breakthrough near Kasserine Pass. His unit, what remained of it, had been pinned down by American armor for 16 hours. No food, no water, no ammunition. Just the relentless North African sun and the thunder of Sherman tanks closing in. The shrapnel caught him during the final American assault. One moment he was crouched behind a burned-out half-track. The next, white-hot pain exploded through his thigh. He remembered looking down and seeing asterisk blood, so much blood asterisk soaking through his trousers. His squad mates were already running, hands up, voices hoarse from shouting, "Kamerad!" the universal signal of surrender. Klaus tried to stand. His leg buckled. He went down hard, face first into the sand that tasted like cordite in despair. This is how I die, he thought, alone in the desert. But then, hands, gentle hands, lifting him. Not German hands, the uniform was wrong. American khaki. Klaus tried to speak, to explain he was wounded, but his throat was too dry. "Easy, buddy, easy, we got you." The voice was calm, almost kind. Klaus felt himself being lifted onto a stretcher. Through the haze of pain and shock, he saw an American medic could not have been older than 20, wrapping his thigh with practiced efficiency. "Pressure here. Keep pressure here." The medic spoke to his partner, then looked down at Klaus. "You are going to be okay, Fritz. Just hang on." Fritz, the American nickname for German soldiers. But the way this kid said it, there was no hatred in it. Just tired professionalism. Klaus had expected a bullet, maybe a rifle butt to the head. The stories from the Eastern Front were clear about what happened to wounded enemies. Instead, he got a morphine shot, clean bandages, water-blessed, cool water dribbled into his mouth. "Drink slow, or you will puke." The stretcher bearers moved him through chaos. American soldiers everywhere, securing prisoners, calling for medics, directing traffic. Klaus kept waiting for the blow that never came, for the cruelty he had been promised. Instead, he got loaded into an ambulance. An actual ambulance, with red crosses painted on the sides. An American medic climbed in beside him. "What is your name, soldier?" Klaus blinked. The medic was asking his name? Like he was a person, not just enemy casualty number 73? "Klaus," he managed. "Klaus Bergman. I am Eddie Morrison, from Philadelphia." The medic checked Klaus's bandages, adjusted the tourniquet. "Hell of a day, huh, Klaus?" Hell of a day. As if they were two workers complaining about a long shift, not enemies who had been shooting at each other an hour ago. The ambulance rattled over rough ground. Klaus faded in and out of consciousness. When he woke, he was in the field hospital. That is when he noticed his leg. The bandages were soaked through, dark stains. And the smell, God, that smell. Eddie was still there somehow, drinking coffee from a tin cup. He saw Klaus was awake. "Hey, buddy, Doc is going to look at you soon. You picked up an infection. Happens out here, sand gets in everything." Infection. Klaus knew what that meant. He had seen gangrene before. On the Eastern Front, infected wounds meant one thing: amputation. If you were lucky, if not, sepsis. Death. His hands started shaking. Eddie noticed. Hey, look at me, Klaus. You are in good hands. Captain Bradley, he is our best surgeon. He will fix you up." Fix him up? Klaus wanted to laugh, to scream. They were going to cut off his leg. He was 23 years old, and he was going to spend the rest of his life as a cripple, if he even survived. That is when Captain Bradley entered the tent. Captain Robert Bradley was not what Klaus expected from an American surgeon. The doctor was tall but slight, with hands that looked too delicate for a soldier. He wore wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. When he examined Klaus's leg, unwrapping the bandages with careful fingers, his face remained impassive. Klaus forced himself to look. The wound was worse, much worse. The flesh around the shrapnel entry was blackened. Streaks of red and purple radiated outward. Even Klaus could see this was not just infection anymore. This was gangrene. "How long has it been since the injury?" Bradley asked Eddie in English. 3 days, sir, maybe 4. Bradley nodded slowly. He pressed gently around the wound. Klaus bit back a scream. "I am sorry," Bradley said in German, accented but clear. "I need to assess the damage." The doctor pulled up that same metal stool. He looked directly at Klaus, and there was something in his eyes. Not pity, not disgust, just clinical assessment mixed with something else. "Concern?" "Klaus, that is your name, yes?" Eddie told me. "Klaus, I am going to be honest with you. This is serious. The infection has progressed to gas gangrene. You have probably heard of it." Klaus nodded weakly. Of course he had heard of it. Gas gangrene killed more soldiers than bullets sometimes. "Standard treatment is amputation," Bradley continued. "Above the knee to ensure we get all the infected tissue. You would survive the surgery we have, good anesthesia, and infection control post-operation has improved significantly." Klaus closed his eyes. There it was. The sentence he had been expecting. "But," Bradley said, Klaus's eyes snapped open. "But I want to try something different, something new." Bradley glanced at Eddie, then back to Klaus. "There is a drug. It is called penicillin. Have you heard of it?" Klaus shook his head. "It is an antibiotic, kills bacteria. It has been used successfully on Allied soldiers with infections like yours. Not many times the drug is very new, very rare. We have extremely limited supplies." Bradley paused. He removed his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on, a nervous gesture. "Klaus, I need your consent. I can amputate right now safe. Proven. You will live. Or I can try the penicillin. It might work. It might save your leg. But it is experimental. And if it does not work, the gangrene will progress. We might lose the window for amputation. You could die." The tent seemed very quiet suddenly. Klaus could hear his own heartbeat, could hear the distant sound of trucks and men shouting orders outside. An American captain was asking him, a German prisoner, if he wanted to try an experimental drug, a rare drug. instead of just cutting off his leg and moving on to the next patient. Why? Klaus managed. Why waste it on me? Bradley looked surprised by the question. You are my patient, he said simply. I am a doctor. You need treatment. Over the next 72 hours, Klaus learned what American medicine really meant. The penicillin came in small vials. Every 4 hours, a nurse, an actual trained Army nurse named Lieutenant Sarah Collins, would inject the drug into Klaus's hip. It burned going in. Klaus did not care. He watched those vials like they were liquid gold, because that is what they were. Eddie, the medic, visited between shifts. He would bring Klaus water, help him eat the K rations that tasted like cardboard but filled his empty stomach. On the second day, Eddie brought something else. A chocolate bar. My sister sent it, Eddie explained. But you look like you need it more than me. Klaus stared at the chocolate. Hershey's. American chocolate. He had been told Americans were soft, that they wasted resources on luxuries. But Eddie was giving his sister's chocolate to an enemy soldier. Why? Klaus asked again. It seemed to be the only question he could form anymore. Eddie shrugged. My dad fought in the last war. He was captured by Germans in 1918. Said they treated him decent. Shared their food, even though they were starving too. He always said soldiers are just guys doing a job. The real enemies are the ones who start the wars. That night, Klaus could not sleep. Not from pain the penicillin was working, the fever breaking, but from confusion. Everything he had been told about Americans was wrong. They were not savages. They were not torturers. They were just people. Captain Bradley checked on him twice daily. On the third day, he brought another doctor, a colonel, to examine Klaus's leg. Remarkable, the colonel said in English. Klaus had picked up enough to understand. The necrosis has stopped spreading. Tissue looks viable. Bradley allowed himself a small smile. The penicillin is working. The colonel glanced at Klaus, then pulled Bradley aside. They spoke in low voices, but Klaus caught fragments. Extremely limited supplies. More wounded coming in from Sicily. American boys who need it. Bradley's response was firm. He is my patient, sir. I started the treatment. We finish it. Klaus pretended to be asleep. But he heard. An American doctor was arguing with a superior officer to continue wasting precious medicine on a German prisoner of war. Lieutenant Collins explained it to him on the 5th day while changing his bandages. The captain is taking heat for treating you, she said quietly. Her German was better than Bradley's. Turned out she had studied in Berlin before the war. Some of the officers think the penicillin should be reserved for American casualties only. They are right, Klaus said, and he meant it. I am the enemy. Sarah looked at him with those steady nurse's eyes that had seen too much death to waste time on nonsense. You are a patient, she said. That is what Captain Bradley believes. That is what I believe. We took the Hippocratic oath, do no harm, treat the sick. It does not say, except if they are German. She finished wrapping his leg. The wound looked better, still ugly, but pink, healthy tissue was visible now. No more black, no more purple streaks. Besides, Sarah added with a slight smile, if we only saved people we agreed with, we would lose half our patients. You should hear some of the political opinions in the American ward. Klaus laughed. Actually laughed. It felt strange. One afternoon, a young American soldier, could not have been 18, was brought into the tent. Stomach wound. Serious. The kid was screaming, terrified, calling for his mother. Klaus watched Bradley work on him. The same careful hands, the same focused intensity, the same determination. American soldier, German soldier Bradley treated them exactly the same. The kid survived. 2 days later, he was conscious enough to look around the ward. He saw Klaus in the German prisoner of war section. That is a Jerry, the kid said to Eddie, his voice accusing. That is Klaus, Eddie corrected. Captain Bradley saved his leg with penicillin. But he is a Jerry. He is also 23, from Stuttgart, has a little sister, and likes American chocolate. Sound familiar? The kid went quiet. Later that evening, he asked Eddie to wheel him over to Klaus's cot. I am Tommy, the American said awkwardly. From Nebraska. Klaus, Stuttgart. They looked at each other. Enemy soldiers. both wounded, both saved by the same doctor. War is fucked up, huh? Tommy finally said. Klaus nodded. Ja, fucked up. They sat in silence for a while. Then Tommy pulled out a crumpled magazine, a copy of Life with Betty Grable on the cover. Want to see? Helps pass the time. They looked at pictures of American movie stars. Tommy tried to explain baseball. Klaus tried to explain football, real football, with feet. They laughed at the language barriers, found common ground in complaining about hospital food. 2 weeks ago, they might have killed each other. Now they were trading stories about their hometowns. On Klaus's 10th day in the hospital, Captain Bradley declared him well enough to transfer to a prisoner of war camp. You are going to limp for a while, Bradley said, conducting his final examination. The muscle damage was significant, but you will walk. You will have your leg. Klaus looked at the scar, a nasty puckered thing that would mark him forever. But it was a scar, not a stump. I do not know how to thank you, Klaus said. Bradley packed his medical bag. You can thank me by surviving this war, by going home to Stuttgart and that sister of yours, by remembering that enemies do not have to be monsters. He extended his hand. Klaus stared at it. An American army captain was offering to shake hands with a German prisoner. He took it. Maybe after the war, Bradley said. You can write to me. Let me know how the leg is doing. Professional interest, you understand. Klaus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Eddie drove him to the prisoner of war camp in a jeep. As they rattled across the desert, Eddie talked about Philadelphia, about his neighborhood, about the cheesesteak place on South Street where he worked before the war. You should come visit after this is all over, Eddie said. I will buy you a real cheesesteak, make up for all those K rations. Klaus laughed. Philadelphia. I will remember. At the camp gates, Eddie helped him down from the jeep. Take care of yourself, Klaus. You too, Eddie, do not get shot. Do my best. Eddie grinned, then more seriously, you know, my dad was right. You are just a guy. I am just a guy. We should be drinking beer together, not shooting at each other. Klaus watched the jeep drive away. He was still a prisoner, still defeated, still facing years in a prisoner of war camp. But he had his leg, he had his life, and he had something else, proof that everything his government had told him about Americans was a lie. Why Americans behaved this way? What happened to Klaus Bergman was not an isolated incident. It was policy. In June 1942, the United States War Department issued explicit orders regarding prisoner of war treatment. The directive was clear. Enemy prisoners would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Period. Not because it was required by treaty, though it was, but because, as General George Marshall wrote, it reflects who we are as a nation. This was not naive idealism. It was strategic brilliance. Marshall and Eisenhower understood something the Axis powers did not. How you treat defeated enemies matters. It matters during the war. German soldiers became more willing to surrender to Americans than to Soviets because word spread about treatment differences. And it matters after the war, when you need former enemies to become allies. American military doctrine emphasized medical care for all wounded, regardless of nationality. Field hospitals received supplies based on total casualties, not nationality of casualties. Surgeons took the Hippocratic Oath seriously. The penicillin decision was more complex. By mid-1944, penicillin production was ramping up, but supplies were still limited. The drug was prioritized for Allied forces, particularly for treating venereal diseases and battlefield infections. Using it on enemy prisoners of war was technically allowed, but generally discouraged. Captain Bradley's decision to treat Klaus was not officially sanctioned, but it also was not punished. His commander, after reading Bradley's report, noted, Captain Bradley exercised medical judgment. The patient survived. Treatment successful. That bureaucratic language disguised something profound. The United States military trusted its doctors to be doctors, not executioners. Klaus was not alone in his shock at American treatment. German prisoner of war diaries and letters from 1943 to 1945 show a consistent pattern: initial fear and propaganda, driven expectations of cruelty, followed by confusion, then gradual realization that American treatment was not only humane, but often better than their own army's care. One German officer captured in Normandy wrote in his diary, "We were told Americans are gangsters and savages. Instead, they share their rations with us. They have Negro soldiers and Jewish soldiers working side by side with no apparent conflict. Everything we were told is lies." Another wrote home, "The American doctors treated my wound the same as they treated their own men. I cannot understand this. We are enemies, but they do not hate us." This was not universal. There were incidents of poor treatment, revenge killings, brutality. War brings out the worst in humanity. But the official policy, the systematic approach, was different. German prisoners of war in American custody had a survival rate of over 99%. Compare that to German-held Soviet prisoners of war, nearly 60% died in captivity. Or Soviet-held German prisoners of war, about 35% died. American-held German prisoners of war? Less than 1% died, usually from wounds received before capture. The numbers told the story American propaganda could not. Their system worked. By war's end, the United States held approximately 380,000 German prisoners of war in camps across America and Europe. They were put to work on farms, in factories, doing non-military labor. They were paid. They were housed in heated barracks. They received mail. They got medical care. In prisoner of war camps in the American South, German prisoners sometimes ate better than the African American troops, guarding them a shameful irony that some German prisoners of war noted in their writings. The camps had libraries, sports facilities, orchestras. The United States government wanted German prisoners of war to see American democracy in action, even in captivity. This was not altruism. It was the same cold calculation that would lead to the Marshall Plan. Americans were already thinking about post-war reconstruction, about turning enemies into allies, about winning the peace, not just the war. Klaus experienced a small part of this larger strategy. Captain Bradley's decision to use penicillin to see Klaus as a patient, not just a German, reflected values embedded in American military culture. Those values had consequences. When German prisoners of war were repatriated after the war, they returned to a destroyed Germany. Many had spent years in American camps. They had learned English. They had seen American newspapers. They had listened to American music. They had been treated, by and large, with basic human dignity. These men became part of West Germany's reconstruction. They voted in elections. They built the new democratic government. And many of them remembered that Americans had shown them a different way to live. Klaus was one of them. What happened to Klaus? Klaus Bergmann was repatriated to Germany in January 1946. He walked off the ship in Bremerhaven on his own two legs, with a pronounced limp that would stay with him for life. Stuttgart was rubble. His family home was gone, but his sister Maria was alive, working in a displaced persons camp run by in a twist. Klaus found almost funny the American Red Cross. He showed her the scar, told her the story. Maria cried. "They saved you? The Americans saved you?" "They saved me." Klaus found work as a translator for the American occupation forces. His English, learned in the prisoner of war camp, was decent. More importantly, he could explain to his fellow Germans what Americans were really like. He became a bridge between occupier and occupied. In 1948, he wrote a letter. It took him 3 weeks to compose, writing and rewriting in his careful English. "Dear Captain Bradley, you may not remember me. My name is Klaus Bergmann. You treated me for gangrene in North Africa, June 1944. You saved my leg with penicillin. I wanted you to know I am walking. I am working. I am alive because of you. More than that, I am free. Germany is rebuilding. We have a democracy now. American democracy. When I vote in our elections, I think of you. I think of Eddie Morrison. I think of Lieutenant Collins. You showed me that enemies can be human to each other. This is what we are building now in Germany, a country where we remember that lesson. I do not know if you will receive this letter. but I had to try. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a German soldier. With deepest gratitude, Klaus Bergmann. The letter reached Bradley in Cincinnati, where he was working as a civilian surgeon. He wrote back immediately. They corresponded for years. Short letters at first, updates on Klaus's work, his eventual marriage, his children, Bradley's stories from his medical practice. When the Berlin Wall went up in 1961, Klaus wrote about watching families divided, about how grateful he was to be in the West. Because of you, he wrote, I survived to live in freedom. In 1968, Klaus did something remarkable. He saved enough money to fly to America, to Cincinnati, to meet Captain Bradley. Now, Doc Bradley, head of surgery at a major hospital face to face. They met in Bradley's office. Two men in their 50s now, both carrying the weight of years and memories. Klaus extended his hand. Dr. Bradley, I came to say thank you. Bradley took his hand, smiled. Klaus, how is the leg? Klaus laughed, still limping, but still walking. They spent 3 days together. Bradley showed Klaus around Cincinnati, took him to a Reds game, introduced him to his wife and children. This is Klaus, Bradley told his kids. I treated him during the war. He was very brave. Klaus met Eddie Morrison, too. Eddie was running 3 cheesesteak places in Philadelphia now, successful and gray-haired. They hugged like brothers. Told you I would buy you a cheesesteak, Eddie said. They ate. They laughed. They toasted with beer to survival, to peace, to the strange paths life takes. Klaus's story was multiplied thousands of times across post-war Germany. Former prisoners of war who had been held by Americans returned home with stories. They had seen democracy work. They had experienced rule of law. They had witnessed a system where even enemies had rights. These men became key to rebuilding West Germany. They voted for democratic leaders. They supported the Marshall Plan. They argued for integration with the West, not alignment with the Soviet East. Konrad Adenauer, West Germany's first chancellor, specifically recruited former prisoners of war who had been in American camps. He wanted men who understood American values, who could bridge the cultural gap. The same pattern played out with Italian prisoners of war, Japanese prisoners of war. Treating defeated enemies with dignity paid strategic dividends that lasted generations. By 1955, West Germany joined NATO. Former enemies became allies. The Cold War made this necessary, but American prisoner of war policy made it possible. It is hard to demonize people who saved your life, who treated you with respect when they did not have to. Klaus became a small part of this larger transformation. He worked with American occupation forces until 1952. Then with the new German-American Friendship Society, he taught English to German students, emphasizing American literature, American history, American values. I tell them about Captain Bradley, Klaus said in a 1975 interview with a Stuttgart newspaper. I tell them Americans could have cut off my leg, could have let me die. Instead, they used their precious medicine to save an enemy. This is the kind of country America is. This is the kind of country we should be. In 1994, Klaus was invited to speak at a German-American friendship event in Stuttgart. He was 73 years old, still limping. He told the story one more time. The gangrene, the fear, the penicillin, the humanity. I expected amputation, he said. I expected cruelty. I got compassion instead. That changed my life. It changed my understanding of what human beings can be to each other, even in war. An American college student asked him, "Do you think it was just because you were German? Would they have done the same for a Japanese soldier?" Klaus paused. I cannot speak to that. The Pacific War was different, more brutal on both sides. But I can say this, Captain Bradley did not save me because I was German. He saved me because I was a patient, because he was a doctor, because he believed in something bigger than nationalism. Dr. Bradley died in 1996. Klaus attended the funeral in Cincinnati. He stood at the graveside, leaning on a cane now, and spoke briefly to the assembled family and friends. 52 years ago, this man saved my leg. More than that, he saved my soul. He showed me that enemies are not monsters. They are humans who can choose compassion over hatred. Robert Bradley chose compassion. The world is better because he did. Klaus died in 2002 in Stuttgart, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. His daughter found the letters, dozens of them. From Bradley, from Eddie Morrison, from other American soldiers Klaus had befriended after the war. At the funeral, she read from one of her father's last diary entries. I am an old man now. My leg still hurts when it rains, but I am grateful for every step I have taken on this leg. Every step is a reminder. Americans saved me when they did not have to. They treated me with dignity when they could have treated me with contempt. This is a debt I can never repay, but I have tried to live my life in a way that honors their choice. I have tried to be as humane to others as they were to me. What this story teaches. Klaus Bergman's story is not unique, but it is uniquely American. Not because Americans are inherently better than other people, they are not. There were American war crimes, there was brutality, there were failures of humanity on all sides. But there was also policy, doctrine, a systematic attempt to treat even enemies according to a moral code. When Captain Bradley chose to use penicillin on Klaus, he was acting on training and values embedded in American military culture, the Hippocratic Oath, the Geneva Convention, the belief that even in war there are lines you do not cross. This was not unique to Americans in an absolute sense, but it was unusual. It was a choice made at the highest levels of command and implemented down to field hospitals in North Africa. That choice had consequences. It convinced enemy soldiers to surrender rather than fight to the death. It created a generation of former enemies who became friends. It laid the groundwork for post-war alliances that shaped the second half of the 20th century. Klaus Bergman walked on two legs because an American doctor saw him as a patient, not a German. That simple choice, repeated thousands of times across theaters of war, changed history. The lesson is not that Americans are perfect. They are not. Every war since has had its Abu Ghraibs, its failures to live up to ideals. The lesson is that ideals matter. Even imperfectly implemented, even inconsistently applied, the principle of treating enemies with basic human dignity pays dividends. Klaus became a teacher, a bridge builder, a living argument for democracy and Western values, because he experienced those values firsthand, in the most unlikely place, as a wounded enemy in an American field hospital. How many other Klaus Bergmans are there? Former enemies who became allies because they were treated with unexpected kindness? How many conflicts could be shortened if combatants knew surrender meant survival, not torture? How many post-war reconciliations become possible when former enemies have positive memories of their treatment? These are not just philosophical questions. They are practical considerations for modern warfare and diplomacy. When American special forces give medical treatment to wounded Taliban fighters, as they sometimes do, they are following the same doctrine Bradley followed in 1944. They are making the same bet, that treating enemies humanely is both morally right and strategically sound. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. But the attempt matters. Klaus Bergman matters. His story matters. Because it reminds us that even in humanity's darkest moments, people can choose compassion over cruelty. Captain Bradley did not have to use penicillin on a German prisoner of war. He chose to. That choice saved a leg, a life, and maybe in some small way helped save a peace. June 17, 1944, Klaus Bergman expected amputation, expected cruelty, expected to lose his leg, maybe his life at the hands of American enemies. He got penicillin instead. He got Captain Robert Bradley's steady hands and stubborn decency. He got Eddie Morrison's chocolate and Sarah Collins's care. He got to walk again. Klaus Bergman expected death. He found humanity instead. This was not just American military doctrine. This was American character, imperfect, inconsistent, but real. The choice to see enemies as humans. The commitment to values even under pressure. The understanding that how you treat the defeated matters as much as how you win the battle. Klaus lived 58 more years. Every step was a testament to that choice. Do you have a family story of American prisoners of war or enemy treatment during World War II? Share it in the comments. These stories matter. They remind us what we can be to each other, even in the worst of times.